Hello friends, fellow bookworms, and bibliophiles, welcome back to my channel. Now normally I do work in a small secondhand online bookshop where I do lots of things including repair books, so I thought I'd share some tips and tricks on how to do some minor repairs to books at home yourself. And today I'm going to be showing you how you can fix loose hinges. Now what I'm talking about with loose hinges is that there. I'm not going to be talking about cracked hinges, which is where you can actually see a crack in the paper along the hinge. That'll be a different video, and I'll link it right up here once that video is posted. But loose hinges is today's lesson. Now before we get started, if you're new to my channel, hello, welcome to Squirrel's Bookshelf. I'm Jess, head squirrel, and don't forget you can always hit that subscribe button if you'd like to become part of our squirrely, nerdy, bookish community. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be tackling loose hinges, which is where the end papers are still completely intact. They've just come loose from the boards or from the netting of the binding. So this is an example of what we're going to be fixing. If you're looking for a video on how to fix cracked hinges, which look more like this, where the end papers have actually split and you can see a crack and sometimes see the netting of the binding, that will be in the other video I talked about. But for today, we're going to be talking about these guys. Alright, so just like practically all of my book repair videos, we're going to start by getting some PVA glue. This is again a washable, water-based glue that won't ultimately stain our books over time. So let's look at a loose hinge. Now this is an old copy of Jack London's White Fang, and in this case, the end paper has already been pulled away from the final page of the book, so you can see that exposed netting. This is actually a great thing because it's so easy to fix if the end paper has already come away from the netting. So I'm going to use a small flat paintbrush, and in little bits at a time I'm just going to paint some glue over that exposed netting. Once that is thoroughly glued, I will also add a little bit of glue along the edges of both the final page of the book and that edge of the end paper that you can see is popped up. Alright, so the trickiest part of this is actually just lining up the end paper. You don't want to just fold the glued part over onto itself too quickly. You'll first want to line up the corners and edges so that the end paper lines up with the rest of the text block. Once it is all lined up, you can take the end of your paintbrush and very carefully just use it to guide that end paper into that area where we have glued. Now don't press too hard, you don't want to push any holes into your end paper, but then you can just close the book and pop it in a book press. So I'll quickly run through how to put a book in a press, but this will be the same for the rest of the examples in this video. Now I want to put out there first and foremost that you do not need an antique cast iron book press like this one that I have. I'm just a nerd. Instead, you could get a book press online. It's made out of plywood and some screws and is a lot more space conscious. And it does the same thing. It can also work to stack just a load of big heavy books on top of the book you're trying to press. But if you are using a press, you'll want to use a second book on the other end of the press that's slightly thicker than the book you're trying to push down, and that will encourage the plates of the press to be angled into the book that needs pressing. In this case, the books are fairly similar, so I'm going to add a second book to make the other end a little bit thicker. So we'll just pop that into the press, tighten the press as much as possible, and then leave it for a minimum of 30 minutes. Now in the next case, this is a copy of the Tales of Uncle Remus. You can see that the hinges are loose, but the end papers are still attached to the pages of the book. So there are two ways you can handle this. You can either leave it attached, which I will show you in a minute, or you can pull apart the end papers from the page. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. You have to be very delicate, and you have to try to keep the pressure even across the end paper, because otherwise it might just cause something to rip. So what I'm going to do is push the board upward and then use the palm of my hand to hold the end paper onto the board as evenly as possible, and very carefully then just open the book. Now if it doesn't start to come apart easily, stop and try a different method. But in this case, it's pulling off very easily. Although as you can see, sometimes it does take a couple of readjustments. Now we can handle the back hinge the same way we handled the hinges of the White Fang book, and just put a bit of glue, line up the end paper corners, line up the edges, and then press down with the back of your paintbrush. Now if you feel confident that you can glue down both sides at once without shifting the end papers, feel free, but for now I'm just going to do one side at a time. And now that one's all ready to be pressed as well. Now this is a book of poetry, and this is an interesting one where actually the entire text block has completely come away from the book. Now while it looks like it's a completely different situation, you can actually treat it in the same way as books where end papers are simply detached from the pages, and that's by just putting a bit of glue down, in this case on both sides. And then since the netting along the spine is intact, I'm going to put some glue across that as well, and also along the spine and edges of the text block itself. And then making sure that both the cover and text block are facing the right way up, I'll insert the text block starting with the spine. And then it may just be slightly trickier to line up the end papers, but once you've done that, it's exactly the same process. And in this case, I'll just do both sides at once. And that's all ready for the press now. Alright, for this H.G. Wells book, when you push the board away from the rest of the book, the gap is actually quite large, so this is an excellent one to demonstrate the third method, which is simply to stick your paintbrush down that gap and to simply put glue down both sides while the end papers are still fairly attached. Now you'll most likely have to flip the book over and do it in sections, but in this sort of example there's no reason why you can't do both hinges at once. Now the end papers will already be lined up to the text block because they're still attached to the text block. However, you will still need to take the end of your paintbrush and gently press the end paper into the hinge. And that'll be on both sides. And then this one's ready for the press too. Now here's a copy of Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales, and for this one there's only one side that needs to be done. And for this I will use the exact same method that I used on the H.G. Wells book. Even though the gap isn't quite as large, I can still fit my paintbrush down there pretty easily. And this is actually a much newer book than any of the others I'm repairing, so it shows you that even more modern books can have this problem. It just depends on the integrity of the glue that was used when the book was originally bound. Now here's one final example of that third method. In this case, it's an old copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and the end papers didn't want to come away easily, so I'm going to have to glue down in the hinges. But in this case, there isn't too big of a gap, so I'm worried that the paintbrush won't fit easily. So instead what you can do is take a knitting needle, preferably one that's not too sharp, because we don't want to accidentally poke any holes through the paper, but you can paint some PVA glue onto the knitting needle and slide that into the gap between the end paper and the binding. Now if you ever find you have a little excess glue, make sure you wipe that away. And once you feel you've gotten enough glue down there, you can come back to your paintbrush and press the end paper into the hinge just as before. So we've taken White Fang out of the press. Let's see how this one looks. And as you can see, the end paper is now attached to the page block, and the hinges are nice and tight. Moving on! So now we've taken this book of poetry out of the press, and as you can see, it is now nice and sturdy. The text block has been successfully reattached. And there's the end result. I'm pretty happy with how these all turned out. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you find this helpful.